Listen carefully, because I am about to tell you something that will fundamentally challenge everything you believe about intelligent species, survival instincts, and the absolute insanity of humans. My name is Kelvin Thresh. I am, or rather I was, a senior xenobiology evaluator for the Galactic Council's Colonization Assessment Division. My job for 17 cycles involved determining whether species were capable of surviving hostile planetary environments without technological support. Simple stuff, really. Drop candidates on a deadly world, observe from orbit, document their inevitable failure or occasional success. Then I met Captain Marcus Webb. The assessment was straightforward. Planet Verdis 9, classification. Death World Tier 7. For context, anything above Tier 5 is considered unsurvivable for 98% of known sapient species. Verdis 9 featured atmospheric composition that would burn most lungs, predators that could shred reinforced combat armor, and plant life so violently toxic that merely brushing against certain species would cause systemic organ failure within minutes. We had 3 candidates that cycle: a thoraxian warrior, built like a living tank with natural armor plating and redundant organ systems; a Zelf infiltrator, capable of chromatic camouflage and possessing venom sacs that could drop a full-grown Krellian in seconds; and then Marcus Webb, human, single redundant organ system, no natural weapons, no armor plating, no venom, no enhanced sensory capabilities. I gave him 4 hours, maximum. My colleague, Rainer Forth, a Delmarian with 3 doctorates in survival biology, gave him 2. We were both catastrophically wrong. The drop happened at dawn, local time. Standard protocol. Each candidate received identical supplies: 1 blade, 1 water purification tablet, 1 emergency beacon that would only activate if they verbally admitted defeat. The jungle below looked like something from a nightmare anthology. Crimson and purple vegetation so thick you could not see the ground from 20 meters up, mist that clung to everything like grasping fingers, and sounds that made my secondary ears flatten against my skull involuntarily. The thoraxian hit the ground running, literally, 200 kilograms of muscle and attitude, crashing through the undergrowth like a biological bulldozer. Admirable strategy, really. Intimidation, territorial establishment, projecting strength. He lasted 47 minutes before something with too many legs and not enough mercy dragged him into a burrow. His beacon activated automatically when his vital signs dropped below survivable thresholds. The Zelf took the opposite approach. Stealth, patience, calculated movement. She found a tree hollow, established a defensive position, and began methodical reconnaissance. Textbook survival tactics. I actually thought she might make it through the first day. Then she brushed against a widow's breath vine while scanning the perimeter. The toxin hit her nervous system in 8 seconds. Beacon activation at the 1 hour 12-minute mark. That left Marcus. I pulled up his feed on my primary monitor, expecting to document the final candidate's demise, file my report and move on to the next assignment. Instead, I watched something that would eventually get me demoted, investigated, and ultimately reassigned to a desk job cataloging asteroid mineral compositions. Marcus did not run. He did not hide. He stood absolutely still for 6 minutes and 40 seconds, just breathing, listening, observing. His head moved in small, controlled increments, tracking sounds I could not even detect through our sensor equipment. Then he smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a desperate "this is fine, everything is definitely fine" smile. A genuine, delighted smile, like someone had just handed him a gift he had always wanted but never expected to receive. "Rainer," I said slowly, not taking my eyes off the screen. "Is the human's psychological profile showing any anomalies?" She checked her instruments, both sets of eyes narrowing in concentration. "Negative. Heart rate elevated but stable. Stress hormones present but not excessive. No signs of panic response or cognitive breakdown." She paused. "Kelvin, is he laughing?" He was, quietly, almost to himself, but definitely laughing. Then Marcus started moving, and I realized I was watching something unprecedented. He did not move like prey. Despite being objectively the most vulnerable organism in that jungle, He moved like someone taking a casual stroll through a garden he had visited 1,000 times before. Every step was placed with deliberate care, but not fear. His eyes tracked everything, constantly scanning, processing, cataloging. At the 30-minute mark, he stopped next to a cluster of screaming bells, flowers that released a pheromone inducing violent territorial aggression in most fauna, fatal for anything that could not leave the area immediately. Standard protocol: avoid at all costs. Marcus leaned in and smelled them. What is he doing? Reiner's tertiary arms were twitching, a Delmarian stress indicator. The pheromone concentration there would drive most species into murderous rage. Marcus pulled back, nodded to himself like he had just confirmed a hypothesis, and carefully plucked 3 of the flowers, wrapping them in a leaf he had tested moments before by rubbing it against his inner wrist and waiting. He is collecting chemical weapons, I heard myself say. He is making tools. For the next 2 hours Marcus moved through that nightmare jungle like he was shopping at a particularly dangerous market. He avoided the obviously lethal with casual competence, tested the questionably dangerous with methods that suggested formal training, and collected samples of things that made my scales itch just looking at them. He found water by watching insect flight patterns. He identified edible vegetation by observing what certain herbivores consumed, then testing tiny amounts himself and waiting for reactions. He built a shelter using branches from a tree species that secreted a natural insect repellent. But it was at the 4-hour mark that everything changed. Marcus encountered a death viper. Now death vipers are not hyperbole. They are 3 meters of pure murder, possessing neurotoxic venom potent enough to kill most species in under 30 seconds. Heat-sensing pits that can detect body warmth from 50 meters, and striking speed clocked at over 20 meters per second. They are apex predators. They fear nothing. The Galactic Council's official guidance on death vipers is simple: if you see one, you are already dead. Marcus saw it before it saw him. He froze, and I watched his eyes track the creature as it slithered across his path, tongue flicking, tasting the air. It was hunting something else. For a moment, I thought he might actually survive if he just remained still. Then Marcus did something that made Reiner drop her datapad. He clicked his tongue, twice. Sharp, precise sounds. The death viper's head snapped toward him instantly, body coiling, preparing to strike. I was already reaching for the emergency extraction authorization, knowing I would not activate it in time, knowing I was about to watch another species fail the assessment. Marcus did not run, did not freeze in terror. He clicked again, different rhythm this time, and slowly, impossibly slowly, lowered himself into a crouch. He is establishing communication, Reiner whispered, and I could hear the disbelief in her voice. With a non-sapient predator. That is impossible. Death vipers do not have the neurological capacity for interspecies communication. But Marcus was treating it like it did. He kept his movements small, non-threatening. He maintained eye contact but not aggressive eye contact. He was breathing deliberately, slowly, making himself less prey-like through pure behavior modification. The death viper watched him, tongue flicking, processing. Then Marcus did the absolutely unthinkable. He reached very slowly into the pouch he had made from woven grass, and pulled out something he had collected an hour earlier. A marble fruit, bright blue, roughly spherical. I knew what those were: highly nutritious, favored by several jungle species, but impossible for death vipers to access, because they grew on trees with bark that secreted an irritant the snakes could not tolerate. He rolled the fruit forward gently. It stopped half a meter from the death viper's head. The snake stared at it, stared at Marcus, tongue flicking rapidly now. This is not happening, I said. This cannot be happening. But it was happening. The death viper uncoiled slightly, approached the fruit, and after several long seconds, unhinged its jaw and consumed it whole. Then it looked at Marcus again, and something in its body language changed. Less coiled tension. More, and I know how insane this sounds, curiosity. Marcus smiled again and very carefully stood up. The death viper watched but did not strike. Marcus clicked softly once more, turned at an angle, not showing his back but not maintaining confrontational positioning either, and walked away. The Death Viper followed him. "I need emergency authorization for enhanced observation protocols," I told the monitoring station. "Flag this assessment as anomalous behavior requiring command attention." "Negative, Evaluator Thresh. Standard observation protocols are sufficient unless candidate activates distress beacon." I looked at Raina. She looked back at me with all three eyes wide with something between horror and fascination. "He has domesticated a Death Viper," she said quietly. "In 4 hours. The human has domesticated something that has no domestication instinct, no pack behavior, no social structure beyond mating aggression." "That is not possible according to established xenobiology," I replied automatically. On screen Marcus was building something, and the Death Viper was coiled nearby, watching him with what I can only describe as interest. He had found a clearing, established a perimeter using the screaming bells he had collected earlier, creating a pheromone barrier that would deter most predators. Smart, efficient, completely insane, but it was working. As the sun began setting on Verdis 9, painting that deadly jungle in shades of amber and shadow, Marcus had shelter, food, water, and apparently a 3-meter venomous bodyguard that he had befriended using nothing but observation, patience, and a piece of fruit. I began writing my report, knowing that nobody would believe it without the recorded data, and even with the data I would spend the next 6 months defending my observations against every xenobiologist in the council. Raina was already muttering calculations, trying to determine how this was possible, running behavioral models that kept coming back with error messages. And Marcus. He was sitting by his shelter, eating something he had carefully prepared using tested plants, occasionally tossing another marble fruit to the Death Viper, who caught them with remarkable precision. At one point he looked up, directly at where he seemed to know our observation satellite was positioned, and gave a small casual salute. Like he knew we were watching. Like he wanted us to know that he knew. Then he settled in for the night, and the Death Viper coiled itself near the shelter entrance, perfectly positioned as a sentry. I checked the mission timer. 6 hours, 42 minutes since insertion. The assessment was supposed to last 72 hours. I had a terrible feeling, sitting there watching that monitor, that the next 66 hours were going to redefine everything we thought we understood about humans, about survival, about the fundamental nature of adaptation and intelligence. I had no idea how right I was, or how much trouble that knowledge would cause me. So there I was. 17 cycles of professional xenobiology evaluation, 3 commendations for outstanding field analysis, and absolutely zero preparation for watching a human turn a Death World survival assessment into what could only be described as, and I apologize for the crude terminology, a camping trip with a murderous reptile he had apparently adopted. Night fell on Verdis 9 like a collapsing roof. The darkness there is not just absence of light, it is presence of something else entirely. Bioluminescent fungi cast everything in sickly green and purple glows. Things that hunt exclusively in darkness emerged from burrows and caves, and the twisted hollows of trees that leaked amber resin. The temperature dropped 19 degrees in 40 minutes. Most species would be fighting hypothermia, fighting predators, fighting the environment itself. Marcus Webb built a fire. Not with technological assistance, not with emergency supplies. He used a method I had only seen documented in historical archives, friction-based ignition using dried plant material he had tested for flammability hours earlier. The whole process took him 11 minutes, and produced a small, controlled flame that he carefully fed with selected wood pieces. The Death Viper, who I had begun mentally calling Noodle, because my brain needed some way to process the absolute madness I was witnessing, shifted position to absorb the heat radiating from the fire. Heat-seeking pits, angled toward the warmth. Body language relaxed. "Kelvin," Raina said quietly, both primary hands pressed against her face in what I recognized as a Delmarian gesture of profound confusion. "The metabolic data I am receiving from that Death Viper indicates decreased stress hormones, elevated serotonin markers, and neural activity patterns consistent with," I cannot believe I am saying this. Contentment. Define contentment in this context, I replied, though I already knew what she meant. The snake is comfortable. It feels safe. It has in under 7 hours bonded with the human as though he were a clutchmate or established pack member, neither of which are behaviors death vipers possess genetically. I watched Marcus pull out his water container, take a measured drink, then pour a small amount into a leaf cup he had fashioned. He placed it near Noodle, who investigated it cautiously before drinking. He is hydrating his apex predator, I said flatly. This is now officially the strangest assessment I have ever conducted, and I once watched a crystalline-based life form solve a puzzle by temporarily dissolving itself. Wait, no, I was not supposed to use that word. Forget I mentioned crystalline. Focus on the human. The night progressed with mounting absurdity. Things approached Marcus's perimeter. Large things. Things with too many eyes and not enough survival instincts, because they clearly did not recognize the danger they were approaching. Not from the human, who admittedly looked like easy prey by most predatory standards. From Noodle. The Death Viper had apparently decided that Marcus was worth protecting. When a razorback prowler 200 kilograms of claws and appetite ventured too close to the camp, Noodle struck so fast our sensors barely registered the movement. The prowler retreated with a face full of neurotoxin, stumbled 6 meters, and collapsed into convulsions. Marcus looked at Noodle. Noodle looked at Marcus. And I swear on my ancestral spawning grounds, the human gave that snake an approving nod and said something our audio receptors translated as, "Good girl, you are such a good Danger Noodle." Yes, you are. Danger Noodle. He had nicknamed a death viper Danger Noodle, and was speaking to it in what our linguistic analysis identified as affectionate diminutive phrasing typically reserved for juvenile or domesticated companion animals. "I am filing a supplementary report," Reiner announced. "This requires xenopsychology consultation. Human behavior is deviating from all established baseline models. You think his behavior is abnormal?" I gestured at the screen where Marcus was now, and I could barely process this, scratching the death viper under what approximated its chin. The snake's tongue was flicking in slow, relaxed patterns. "That entire species is abnormal. Did you read the cultural files?" I skimmed them. They have a documented historical pattern called domestication syndrome. They take wild species, dangerous species, and through selective breeding and behavioral conditioning, turn them into companions. They did it with wolves, with jungle cats, with birds of prey. They have kept venomous reptiles as pets for thousands of their years. Reiner's tertiary eyes widened. But those are multi-generational processes requiring genetic selection and controlled breeding programs. Exactly. I pointed at the screen. That human just speed-ran the entire concept in 7 hours using nothing but observation, pattern recognition, and apparently, an unlimited supply of audacity. Hour 9 brought rain. Not pleasant rain. Verdi's 9 rain, which had a pH level acidic enough to irritate exposed skin and reduce visibility to almost nothing. The kind of weather that sends every sensible organism into shelter to wait it out. Marcus adjusted his shelter, reinforcing weak points, with additional layered leaves he had apparently gathered earlier in anticipation of exactly this scenario. Then he widened the entrance, and made a gesture toward Noodle. The death viper slithered inside. 3 meters of apex predator, coiling itself along the back wall of a shelter barely large enough for both occupants, positioning itself in a way that suggested it understood the concept of shared space and personal boundaries. "They are cohabitating," Reiner whispered. "A human and a death viper are sharing shelter during an acid storm. I am updating my assessment classification from anomalous to unprecedented," I replied, fingers moving across my datapad with perhaps more force than necessary. No other evaluated species has demonstrated this level of environmental adaptation, combined with interspecies social engineering. The storm lasted 3 hours. Through our thermal imaging, I could see 2 distinct heat signatures in that shelter, close but not touching, both in positions that suggested rest rather than defensive vigilance. Marcus appeared to actually sleep for 90-minute intervals, which suggested either supreme confidence or suicidal stupidity. Given everything else I had witnessed, I was leaning toward the former. Dawn of Day 2 arrived with the subtlety of a biological warfare strike. Verdi's 9 mornings featured a phenomenon called screamer swarms, where millions of territorial insects emerged simultaneously, creating a sound wall registering at 140 decibels, enough to disorient most species, enough to potentially cause permanent auditory damage. Marcus stuffed plant fiber in his ears, waited 15 minutes for the swarm intensity to peak and pass, then emerged from his shelter looking remarkably well rested for someone who had spent the night in a murder jungle with a venomous roommate. Noodle emerged after him, and I noticed something that made my scales itch with professional concern. The death viper was staying close. Not hunting distance close. Companion distance close. Following Marcus's movements, responding to his gestures, exhibiting behavior patterns that suggested not just tolerance but active cooperation. Reiner, I need behavior analysis on the death viper, full spectrum. She ran the diagnostics, then ran them again, then a third time before speaking. Kelvin, according to these readings, the death viper is exhibiting proto-pack bonding behaviors. Neural pathways associated with social hierarchy recognition are showing unprecedented activity. It has, in approximately 18 hours, developed neurological patterns that its species does not possess naturally. That is impossible. I am looking at the data. Impossible or not, it is happening. Marcus spent the morning doing something I can only describe as exploring, not desperately searching for resources, not frantically trying to survive, exploring, with interest, with curiosity. Like he was on vacation in a particularly dangerous nature preserve. He found a stream, tested the water quality using methods that demonstrated formal training in field survival techniques, and filled his containers. He caught something approximating fish, using a trap he wove from flexible branches in under 20 minutes. He identified 3 additional edible plant species through careful testing protocols. And through all of this, Noodle followed, watched, learned. At hour 22, something happened that elevated the situation from unprecedented to potentially paradigm-shifting. Marcus encountered another death viper, larger than Noodle, male, based on scale pattern analysis, territorial, aggressive. It detected Marcus's presence and immediately moved to attack posture, body coiling, head raised, preparing to strike. Noodle positioned herself between Marcus and the threat. No, Reiner breathed. No, that is not defensible behavior. Death vipers do not protect other species. They are solitary ambush predators with no protective instincts outside of their own eggs. But Noodle was absolutely demonstrating protective behavior. She raised herself to full height, matching the male's posture, and released a hissing sound that our audio analysis identified as a territorial warning. Marcus did not run, did not panic. He slowly backed away, giving both snakes space, but also, and this was fascinating, made a series of clicking sounds and low vocalizations. He was trying to de-escalate. The male death viper struck at Noodle. She dodged, faster than I had seen her move before, and counterattacked with precision that suggested not wild aggression but controlled defense. They engaged in what our behavioral analysis classified as ritualized combat, the kind that establishes dominance without necessarily resulting in death. Marcus maintained his distance but continued vocalizing, calm sounds, non-threatening postures, and somehow impossibly, both snakes seemed to register his presence as a factor in their confrontation. The fight lasted 4 minutes. Noodle won through a combination of speed and strategic positioning. The male retreated, displaying submission signals. Then Marcus did something that made me seriously consider requesting emergency psychological evaluation. He approached the defeated male death viper, moving with the same careful deliberation he had used with Noodle, and offered it a marble fruit. He is attempting to domesticate a second death viper, I said, and my voice cracked slightly on the last word. He watched 2 apex predators fight, identified the loser, and is now trying to recruit it using food-based positive reinforcement. The male death viper stared at the fruit, stared at Marcus, stared at Noodle, who had positioned herself near Marcus in a way that clearly communicated pack association. After 17 seconds that felt like 17 years, the male death viper consumed the fruit. Marcus smiled and very gently touched its snout. The snake flinched but did not strike. "I am naming him Danger Noodle Jr.," Marcus said clearly, apparently for the benefit of our recording equipment. "Or maybe Spike. He looks like a spike." By hour 30, Marcus Webb had established a camp featuring reinforced shelter, organized food storage, water purification system, defensive perimeter using chemical deterrents, and 2 death vipers who had apparently accepted him as some form of pack leader. By hour 48 he had expanded his camp, created a rudimentary map of the surrounding territory, using charcoal and flat stones, and taught both snakes to respond to different whistle patterns. By hour 60 he was thriving. Not surviving. Thriving. He had gained weight from adequate nutrition. His stress markers were lower than when he had started. He appeared to be, and I struggled to accept this, enjoying himself. At hour 71 I received priority communication from Galactic Council Command. "Evaluator Thresh, explain your assessment report immediately." I looked at Raina. She looked at me. We both looked at the screen, where Marcus was currently sunbathing on a rock while his 2 death vipers coiled nearby in companionable silence. "Sir, the human candidate has successfully adapted to Verdis 9 environment through advanced tool use, environmental manipulation, and unprecedented interspecies social engineering. He has not only survived, but established territorial dominance through non-violent proxy relationships with apex predators. He has effectively colonized a Death World Tier 7 environment in under 3 days. Silence on the communication line. Evalia Thresh, are you telling me that a human has befriended Death Vipers? Befriended, domesticated and integrated into a functional survival pack structure? Yes, sir. More silence. We are sending an extraction team. Do not, under any circumstances, allow that human to continue this assessment. But it was too late. At hour 72 exactly, Marcus activated his beacon voluntarily, not in distress, not in defeat. Because the assessment period was over. His extraction message, recorded for official record, consisted of 6 words that would eventually be quoted in every xenobiology textbook for the next century. "Can I bring my snakes home?" The answer, after 6 hours of emergency council deliberation, was no. Marcus was extracted, debriefed and eventually returned to human space with full marks on his survival assessment and a job offer from the Galactic Council's Extreme Environment Colonization Program. Noodle and Spike were relocated to a preservation habitat where, according to last reports, they remain unusually social for their species and have successfully reproduced, producing offspring with slightly elevated social behavior markers. I was demoted for failing to maintain proper observational objectivity. Raina was reassigned to a research position studying human domestication patterns. And humans? They were upgraded to Tier 1 colonization candidates, approved for settlement on any environment up to and including Death World classification. Because apparently, when you drop a human in a murder jungle, they do not just survive. They make friends. Even when those friends are 3 meters of venom and violence that every other species in the galaxy has the good sense to avoid. I still have the recordings. Sometimes, late in my work cycle, I review them, trying to understand exactly what I witnessed. Trying to reconcile established xenobiological theory with the reality of Marcus Webb turning a survival assessment into an impromptu wildlife rehabilitation program. My conclusion, after months of analysis: humans do not adapt to their environment. They convince the environment to adapt to them. And that, terrifyingly, is why they will probably outlast every other species in this galaxy. Because while the rest of us were learning to survive hostile worlds, humans were learning to make hostile worlds less hostile through the simple expedient of befriending everything dangerous enough to protect them from everything else dangerous. It is brilliant. It is insane. It is so fundamentally human that I should have seen it coming. I did not. Nobody did. And that, ultimately, is why they scare us so much.